Welcome back to Unveiling the Truth. I'm your host, Nephra.
And I'm Nellie, and in this video we're going to be continuing this sacrament series and explaining the last sacrament, which is the Holy Orders.
Yep, so without further ado, let's go unveil the truth.
Okay, so before we get started, just like we start off everything that is intended to be good and holy, we're going to start this off with a prayer.
Okay, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Pater noster, qui es in celis, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in cielo et in terra. Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie, et dimitte nobis debita nostra, sicut et nos dimittimus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen.
Amen.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Nipper.
You're welcome.
So, on this last sacrament, we're going to be talking about the Holy Orders. And the thing about Holy Orders that it's very interesting is that only men can receive all 7 of the sacraments. Because only men can receive the Holy Orders. Because there is nuns, which is religious life, but that's not Holy Orders. The Holy Orders are talking specifically about the priest and the vocation of priest. And that's why it's under the, along with marriage, it's under the category of vocation sacraments. Or service sacraments. Because the priests are giving service. The marriage gives service to each other. The priest gives service to the people.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, and so, quoting really quickly from the Catechism to explain what the Sacrament of Holy Orders is.
Oh wait, let me explain what it is real quick first.
Okay.
The Holy Orders, we're talking about the priests who are ordained by the hands of people who are ordained by the hands of apostles. So God gave us the authority, and God intended there to be priests, and he made the apostles figures of Christ, and then he told them to go out and do the same thing. So they laid hands on people and made more priests, and then they laid hands on people, and then they laid hands on people, and so we have the priests we have now. And that's what the vocation is that we have specific figures of Christ who are priests, who are actually persona Christi and help provide the sacraments and give the sacraments and provide our salvation for us.
Right.
And they have to be really holy men. And
Yeah.
they go through a lot of education and training to become priests.
Yeah, it's like college times 2.
Yeah, really.
Okay, so in number 1536 of the Catechism, Holy Orders is a sacrament through which the mission entrusted by Christ to his apostles continues to be exercised in the Church until the end of time. Thus, it is the sacrament of apostolic ministry. It includes 3 degrees, episcopate, presbyterate, and diaconate. Yeah. That's pretty much what you said. But just like, the more catechesis way of saying it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you think about that on a level, priests' jobs are very important because there's not almost all sacraments the priest is being persona Christi in that. So that is the most intimate with Christ we're going to be, because God knows we're intimate beings and we need that physical likeness, that we need that physicalness in front of us, and that's what the priests provide for us. So God asked them to be priests, and he asked them, and without the priest, there's no sacraments or salvation for us. Mm-hmm. So honestly, the priests are in charge of our salvation, and that's why we call him Father. Because we call him Father because we're actually supposed to be close with them because they're spiritual fathers. Every single person that the priests meet, they're in charge of their soul to get them to heaven. So without the priests, our salvation is basically wrecked because they bring us confession, they bring us communion, and that's why God chose them to be such specific people, and that's why they're all passed down from the apostles. Mm-hmm. And in every sacrament, you can see that they're in persona Christi. Like communion, that's God, he consecrates the Eucharist and gives himself to you, and then in confession, he's a mediator between God and you, and in the confession, he's actually being Jesus Christ himself, mm-hmm. but he's just that physical being, but he's actually representing Christ. Yeah. So that it's so crazy to think that like all these priests, and because of that, you could say that, I would say that because all the priests are persona Christi, that's why you need to treat them with such respect and be close with them, because you're literally close with Jesus, like you're literally with Jesus basically. Mm-hmm. And it's like when you think about that, that's why I would say that, though this is kind of the way I've always thought about it, is that each priest kind of represents a different part of Christ. Like one priest could be his stern side, one priest could be God's happy side. Like they all contain like a personality or like an image of Christ in them because they're all Jesus, So I don't know, I like to think so. Even like the priest that, you're upset with, you're like, he also is still Christ, so you have to respect him. And he even represents a part of Christ, like even if it's a stubborn part, Like they all represent Christ, so that's so cool. That's why you want to be close with your priests and you want to appreciate them, because without them, we don't have sacraments, so we don't have salvation. And that's why they're like, and what they do is like super important in the church, like life and death and stuff. Like with the faculties, they can get their faculties taken away. So their job is like super important for us. That's why it's service for others, because their job is literally for us. That's why we need to appreciate them. Yeah. And it often leaves them lonely too, because they can't get married, they can't have kids, because they're vowed to like, they have 3 vows of obedience, poverty, and chastity. Mm-hmm. So, and because of that, so they're denying this world, so they have so a lot of times they're super lonely. Because they're by themselves, and they don't say that because they're in service to us. So that's why we need to appreciate them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and going back to what you said about fathers, Dr. Scott Hahn in his Science of Life book, he talks about the priesthood and how like the whole fatherhood thing is what contributes a lot to the priesthood. And so he says, fatherhood is the original basis of priesthood. The very meaning of priesthood goes back to the father in the family, his representative role, spiritual authority, and religious service. The firstborn is the father's heir apparent, the one groomed to succeed one day to paternal authority and priesthood within the family. From the beginning, priesthood belonged to fathers and their blessed sons. And so when he talks about this, it's kind of like going back to like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob.
Right.
And you know how there's like the garments and stuff. So like when Jacob took the firstborn rights from Esau, it's like he became assigned the priest.
Yeah.
In that situation, that's why he got the garments. Like his mom gave him the garments and stuff. And so with that idea of fatherhood in mind, Scott Hahn continues by saying, thus with Jesus came a restoration of the natural priesthood of fathers and the establishment of a fatherly order of new covenant priests. According to the Epistle to the Hebrews, Jesus' role and identity as the faithful firstborn Son of God, see Hebrews chapter 1 verse 6, qualify him as the perfect mediator between God, his Father, and us, his brothers and sisters. To Christ, we are the children God has given me, Hebrews chapter 2 verse 13, the many sons, Hebrews chapter 2 verse 10, his brethren, Hebrews chapter 2 verse 12, the new seed of Abraham, Hebrews chapter 2 verse 16, who together form God's family/household, which Jesus builds and rules, Hebrews chapter 3 verse 3, as a son, Hebrews chapter 3 verse 6. As all Christians are identified with Christ, the church becomes the assembly of the firstborn, Hebrews chapter 12 verse 23. And then he goes on to kind of explain how St. Paul, even in his letters, specifically in the first letter to the Corinthians chapter 4 verses 15, he says, for though you have countless guides in Christ, you do not have many fathers, for I became your father in Christ Jesus through the gospel. And so it talks a lot about how spiritual fatherhood, and St. Paul was considered one of the apostles.
Yeah.
He was like one of the later additions to the whole apostolate mission. And so, the apostles, which were the first bishops, kind of like the higher order of the priests, they're the ones who are our spiritual fathers. And they were like, passing this line on, like we talked about many times when talking about the apostolic succession and authority of the church. They continually pass down this spiritual fatherhood. And he says to himself, like, I've become a spiritual father to all of you guys.
Right.
Because, this is the role that God has given me.
Well, and when you look at, there are many times where, like, God takes and he entrusts, like, even saints, he entrusts saints to priests as their confessor and stuff, because he knew the authority and the graces and the power he gave those priests.
Yeah.
So he's like, I'm giving you this priest to help you through your struggles in life and to help you with your salvation. And he even entrusted saints to the priests, like St. Faustina. Like, she had her specific confessor. And that's how important the priests are. They play such a big role. And, there's other orders like the monks, the Dominicans, and there's different types of priests. There's that's
why they call it secular priests and the religious priests.
Right. And then there's diocesan priests. And
those are the secular priests.
Okay, yeah. So there's specific priests who are in charge of like a specific diocese who like stay in a diocese, and then there are specific priests who go on mission trips and go and like preach to people.
And they have their own charisms according to what their order is.
Yeah,
so, like,
exactly.
The Third Order Franciscans, the Dominicans. What are the other ones? The Benedictines.
Right. And then of course the higher up priests, there's the bishops, the cardinals, the monsignors, and stuff like that. These are all very important people in the Catholic Church, especially in the Vatican, who work to keep the Catholic Church up, because God said the powers of hell will not prevail against it.
Yeah.
And they work hard to keep out the evils of the secular world outside of the church. That's why it's really frustrating when you see some of these priests who aren't doing that, and some of these bishops who aren't doing that. It's like, yo, you have this important role and you're like failing it. It's like you're such a because they are in charge of everybody, so they're in charge of being a good example to people. Like, children should love priests because they're literally Jesus Christ, basically,
Yeah, well, they're acting
in Jesus Christ,
Yeah, and so just the in brief of the catechism for this article is like, I thought it was really nice how it explains it. And so from 1590 to 1592, it says, St. Paul said to his disciple Timothy, I remind you to rekindle the gift of God that is within you through the laying on my hands. 2 Timothy chapters 1 verse 6, and if anyone aspires to the office of bishop, he desires a noble task. The first letter to Timothy, chapter 3 verse 1. To Titus he said, this is why I left you in, how do you say that, Crete? Crete?
Yeah,
Crete?
I think Crete, I don't
know. That place. That you amend what was defective and appoint presbyters in every town as I directed you, which is in Titus chapter 1 verse 5. And so it says, the whole church is a priestly people. Through baptism, all the faithful share in the priesthood of Christ. This participation is called the common priesthood of the faithful. Based on this common priesthood, in order to its service, there exists another participation in the mission of Christ. The ministry conferred by the Sacrament of Holy Orders, where the task is to serve in the name and in the person of Christ, the head in the midst of the community. The ministerial priesthood differs in essence from the common priesthood of the faithful because it confers a sacred power from the service of the faithful. The ordained ministers exercise their service for the people of God by teaching, munus accendi, divine worship, munus liturgicum, and pastoral governance, munus regendi. So,
yeah, and honestly,
kind of sums it up.
And that's why we allow them to have that authority over us, because God gave that to them through the apostles. And we need to take a time to appreciate just how powerful priests are.
Yeah,
they're probably the most more powerful than wizards, witches, soothsayers, all those people, because they have the power to consecrate the Eucharist, consecrate the body and blood of consecrate the body and blood of Christ. Transubstantiation. Yeah, thank you. Transubstantiation for occur. They have the power to heal people, to forgive sins, to bind things on earth that can be bound in heaven, and it's just and retain sins, and it's just our souls and salvation really depend on these people. They are the most powerful people, and all their hands are sacred. So honestly, when you meet a priest, you should kiss their hands, because they're literally the hands of Jesus Christ, and that's why we need to respect them so much.
Yeah, and that's also why we talk about we've talked about in a couple episodes before when receiving the Eucharist, how we should receive the Eucharist on the hand, because the priests are the ones that give it out, and because they're the ones that have the consecrated hands.
Yeah,
they're the ones that have that
blessing.
You mean we should receive
communion on the tongue?
Yeah.
Yeah, you said receive on the hand.
Did I say that?
Yeah, I was what?
Yeah,
we should receive on the tongue.
Yeah.
Because because they have the consecrated hands, and they should be the only ones deserving to touch that.
Yeah. So us on the mouth, them
on the
hand.
Yeah, exactly. And see, when you think about it, that's why God made them only priests. Made them only men. A lot of people ask why priests can only be men, and that's for so many different reasons. Men and women have different roles in the church. Yeah. And they're both equal, they're just different. And see, the thing with men is that the reason he made the men is because he knew the way they think. They're super direct. They're supposed to be protective and providing like a father. They're authoritative. And because women are so emotional and they like to act upon their feelings and stuff like that, they wouldn't be able to execute certain situations as well as men. Exorcisms, and if somebody's oh my gosh, can you imagine? And then just performing, and because the apostles were all male. Jesus was male and the apostles were all male, and they're supposed to represent Jesus and the apostles, so that's why they're supposed to be men.
And it's what people have said before, if God had also wanted women to be priests, he would have don't you think Mary, he would have appointed his mom as high priestess.
Yeah, exactly.
He would have appointed Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary of Clopas, the other Marys and the other women that followed him.
And we also mentioned in another video, this could also revert back to Adam, where Adam didn't protect Eve's soul when she ate from the fruit. So now this is God saying, okay, you as men are going to protect the souls of people, and that also reflects back on priests.
Let me just reiterate this authority you already had, but let me just make it a little bit more, spell it out for you, bro.
And women are super important in the church, obviously, because Jesus was the first one to respect women, because he let women walk with him.
Yeah.
And when that was never seen.
Yeah.
So that being said, it's just that we have different roles, and the men are able to execute these more properly because of the way they think. They're authoritative, they're protective like a father, and how cool is that? And sometimes priests reflect a better father figure than their own father themselves. I know that I'm super close with some priests, and I know people who don't have that father figure, so they fall back on priests to be that father figure for them. They're super important for us, and we really need to appreciate them.
Yeah. So enough with this whole women ordination.
Yeah,
nonsense.
That's awful. That's against the church, and it'll always be against the church.
Man.
It will always be against the church to ordain women. It will never be valid, because it can only be by consecrated hands and by God's will. And also, it's also really cool because how important this is the Pope, if he ever spoke anything that was heresy in the chair of Peter, he would be struck down. They're in that complete in line with God, and into that spiritual world that God can communicate with them and use give them that authority to do what they do, because if they didn't have that direct line to the spiritual to heaven, then how would they be able to do the transubstantiate? Thank you. Consecration. Transubstantiation. Thank you.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be able to do that. They wouldn't be able to forgive sins, and because God gave them that authority, we know that it's bound into heaven. So that's why they're so important, and that's why we need to respect the priests, and that's why it's the Sacrament of Holy Orders, because these priests take that covenant and vow to be a good and holy priest for us and for him for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
So thank you guys so much for watching. We hope it was understandable for you.
Yes, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Unveiling the Truth with Nefer and Ellie. If you're listening to the podcast, check out the video version if you'd like to, or if you're watching, check out the audio version. Make sure to follow us on our other platforms, which will be down on the link tree below.
Yep. Thank you guys so much for watching. We're praying for you, and keep that fire burning.
Bye.